listening to Planet Vero Radio. I am Cindy Schwartz. We are broadcast on iHeart, and we are also podcast on Spreaker. This is the Patient Partners Show. I have my co-host Jeannie Roller with me. She is by phone from Indiana. Jeannie, we're going to talk today. I'm going to let you run with this about the informed consent. I mean, what is informed consent? We signed the paper. My instance, really, the things that I wanted to be informed of and consented to didn't happen. Things got switched around. I know you have the same history. Your husband has the same history of that. So let's talk about that. I mean, what is informed consent for medical surgical patients?
Well, informed consent and the consent form are actually two different things. Informed consent is very, very tricky. Informed consent is basically whatever the doctor thinks that you need to know in order to sign that consent form. Now, what you sign on the consent form may not be what you agreed to in the informed consent discussion, and that's usually done verbally. Back in 2004, CMS, Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, issued formal guidelines on what informed consent should be. In 2007, they rescinded most of those guidelines because the medical providers didn't like them. And in 2007, the guidelines no longer required that hospital consent forms list the risk and consequences of procedures. They could list just the vague risk and complications. It also took away that hospitals no longer had to list any alternative procedures or treatments. It also took away that hospitals didn't have to name all the people participating in the procedure or other important aspects of the procedures, such as assigned surgical tasks that may be conducted by a certain person. And they no longer require that a, so to speak, professional witness the consent form. This actually is what caused consent to no longer be favoring the patient, but rather favoring the medical provider, because in the informal consent discussion, the medical provider now is allowed to only tell you what they want you to know in order to get you to sign that form saying, yes, you're going to have this done. And those forms are very different than the informed consent process. So at some point we need to discuss consent forms versus informal consent. So what Medicare CMS did was make it possible for people actually not to have autonomy in their choice in making and getting a procedure done or deciding whether or not they're going to have it done, what procedure they want done, and knowing who is going to be, providing the services in that procedure. So, I mean, they just really took away the patient's right and ability to know and to make informed consent decisions. It took us backwards, not forward.
Right.
And it again shows that the medical community does not want to be transparent in their transactions with us. They want to remain behind the smoke screen, that they always have something that they want to hide from us. So it causes a lot of distrust. It has caused a lot of people to have things done to them that they didn't really think that they were agreeing to have done, like women going in to have a cyst removed and waking up finding out they had both ovaries removed because the informed consent process wasn't truthful.
And it also brings to light the recent news of the informed consent paperwork, but yet people were having pelvic exams which they hadn't consented to, but the medical community felt that fell under the umbrella of, well, you consented to this, to a procedure.
You're there. Yeah.
To a procedure. And so these are our medical students. So, therefore they are legitimately in this, in that medical system. It's not like we're bringing people in that, are bartenders or, whatever, police, whatever, that are going to do these uninformed pelvic consents. And so, wow, I mean, that opened the door that these things were happening.
Yeah. Yeah, and basically on what you're talking about, the pelvic exams, they felt that your informed consent was if you go to a teaching hospital, well, you went to a teaching hospital, that is your informed consent. That's what they do, they teach. And that's not necessarily true because you have the right to refuse people, residents, medical students, but they weren't giving you the information to allow you to make that decision to refuse them. They were withholding that. So that's all legal. And they know it, and they get away with it. So
yeah, and the other thing, too, is people will say, you know, if you have a problem with this, you should do your own research for this particular procedure that you're going to have done. So if you're going to have a GYN procedure, you're going to say, you know, some people say that argue against this, that, you know, that we're not right. Look up all the stuff that you need to know for this procedure and ask all your questions. The doctor is there, ask all the questions. Okay, is any person going to know every question to ask? And the other thing is, and we've had people on the show that have talked about this, that did do that. As much as they could, diligently did do that, tried to think of all the questions, went specifically to the doctor, and the doctor lied. The doctor said that will absolutely not happen. Let's just go ahead with this procedure. And there was not the specific questions that person asked, that doctor specifically lied about.
Right. Well, one good example is if you go to the doctor and you find out you have an ailment, and that doctor and or hospital that the doctor practices at has bought equipment for a certain type of procedure to be done with that equipment, then chances are during your informed consent discussion that doctor will not tell you there are other methods that they can use to get rid of your issue. That because that they bought new machinery, they are going to say this is the way it needs to be done. They're not going to say, but there is another way, B and C, that it can be done. Right. Because informed consent no longer requires them to be totally honest. So that is a huge problem because hospitals invest a lot of money to train people to use the machines that they buy. So therefore, they push this certain way to do a procedure. And it's not always the best way, but it is the best way for them to pay for their machinery.
Well, that's a valid statement. It's that you just made. It's the best way for them. End of discussion.
Right.
You know, that it's the best way for them. And we don't know that. As the patients, unless you go through the stuff like that you've gone through, I have gone through, all the people that we talk with on here go through, you don't have like the background to know that this stuff could possibly happen because you just can't fathom that this stuff could possibly happen. I know that sounds stupid, but it's just insane. And then when you have it happen to you, you know, it's like the I don't want to use the police, but I mean, as the police do so-and-so, you would never have thought a police officer would do something like that, and then they do. You know, it's almost like a Stephen King novel. You know, kudos to Stephen King that he can think this stuff up, but we're actually living this in real life, and we're trusting these things, and this stuff is so bendable that you really don't know. It's like walking on a mattress. You really don't know what the legitimacy of a lot of this stuff is and what's not, and even if you ask the question, and then you get a lie for an answer, and then it's covered up. It's crazy. So there really isn't any informed consent.
And the other thing is when you have these informed consent discussions, they're verbal.
Right.
And they don't always transfer to the consent form that you're signing.
Correct.
And that's the other scary thing. So that you may have had this discussion and you may have said, I do not want to have this certain thing done, and I do not want this certain drug used, or I don't want this certain person involved.
We got like 10 seconds left, Jeannie. Yeah, I get it. Yeah. And so even if you do that, they cross it out and have you sign another paper when you're drugged up, because I know that's happened to people. So anyway, I want to say a huge kudos to Misty Roberts at patientmodesty.org. Jeannie Roller, you're on Twitter at Writes4Patients, the numeral 4. And you've been listening to Planet Vera Radio. Stay tuned.